Good morning. My name's James White. I am the Managing Director of Media First. Thank you so much for joining us on what is the third in our series of webinars. If you've not seen the others, you can jump on our website and you can download them now. And in fact, off the back of each of the webinars that we've done, there's an additional Q&A session. So if we do get lots of questions off the back of this webinar, then we'll probably do the same as that. Today's webinar is the science behind making memorable messages. I'm very grateful for Graham and Linda, who will be joining us. So Graham Jones is internet or a psychologist specializing in the way that people use the internet. Graham has worked with Media First for, a number of years, probably a couple of decades in all honesty. And he delivers many of our social media training courses, as well as he's done over the years some media training courses, message development sessions, and message testing sessions for us. And in fact, he's also done a lot of writing skills courses, which have been for marketing, as well as helping people to create blogs and things like that. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know and we can get you set up either with Graham or one of the other tutors. In fact, a bit later on, there is going to be a pop-up where you can just schedule a 20-minute meeting with either myself or one of my team, and we can just have a chat about any communications challenges or requirements you guys have that we might be able to help you with. So Graham is going to be hosting the event today, and joining Graham is going to be Dr. Linda Shaw. Now, I need to look at my notes to make sure I get this right, because Linda is a cognitive neuroscientist and business specialist. I'm hoping that Graham's first question is going to be, what is a cognitive neuroscientist? So as well as all of her academic work, she's presented many TEDx talks, written for Forbes, and appeared on many a radio and TV show. She's also the national president for the Professional Speakers Association, which I believe is a role that Graham might have held in the past as well. So as I've already mentioned, Graham's going to be hosting it. We're going to have a really good chat with Linda, but we want this to be as interactive as possible, guys. So on your screen, you should be able to see a place where you can ask questions. If you ask those questions, even if you don't have a question to ask, then you can upvote those questions. So you can go on there. I can see Spencer, well done, mate. You've already jumped in there and asked a question straight away. And if you jump in there, ask the question, then what will happen is you can go in, you can click on the thumbs up to say, I like that question, I want that question to be answered. And the more people that upvote that question, it's going to move up the chain of questions. It's more likely to get answered live today. If we've got loads, we'll just do it another time. So please do jump in, make it as interactive as possible. It really is down to you guys that make these webinars. This has been our most popular webinar so far. With both of the others, well, that's very tight. With both of the others, we had about 570 attendees. With this one, we're on 650-ish at the moment, I think it is, which is just fantastic. So, you know, you guys are obviously enjoying it and we're enjoying producing them for you. So if you've got any ideas of types of webinars that you'd like us to do or topics you'd like us to cover, please do let us know. We are here to hear those ideas. Right, so without further ado, let me get Mr. Graham Jones on screen. Graham, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, James.
Hello, mate. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Are you nice and hot in that studio, or have you got air conditioning?
I'm not going to lie. It is. We've got a gallery over there, and the gallery is air conditioned, but the studio itself isn't because of the noise. So yeah, it's warm.
Okay, and I suspect that everybody listening is also warm. So what we'll try and do is lighten the load a bit and have a bit of fun. I know Linda very well, and I'm sure that we'll have a bit of a chat and a bit of a laugh as we go through. It's worthwhile pointing out that, as James said, I'm a psychologist. Linda is a cognitive neuroscientist. I haven't got a first question, James, so thanks for giving me that first question.
That's all right, mate.
we will chat away. It's a bit like we're moving into science. So actually, I feel a bit like that we are the the Chris Whitties of the world now, and I ought to be saying, because it's science, can we have our first slide, please? We haven't got any slides until the end, and those slides are just examples of messages, and we're going to take you through those examples and chat about what the science was behind those messages. So they'll come up a bit later. But let me introduce you to Dr. Linda Shaw, who is, there we are, Linda. Good morning to you.
Morning, Graham. Morning, James.
Hi, Linda.
Linda, what is a cognitive neuroscientist?
I'm so pleased you asked. Okay, a cognitive neuroscientist is basically somebody who looks at parts of the brain in terms of their relationship to behavior. So we look at cognition, we're looking at judgment, problem solving, language, all of those higher executive functions, plus emotion, plus, of course, the hormonal system and all of the other systems in the brain and the body, because you actually can't truly separate them. The brain affects behavior, behavior affects the brain. There's constant feedback loops. So basically, I work with companies who really want to understand decision-making, problem-solving skills, any of those higher order things, and how to actually respond well emotionally in the boardroom and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's what we do. It's cognition and the brain.
Good, thank you. I think one of the important words that you mentioned there was emotion, and what we want to look at during this webinar is, what are the key components of a good message in terms of the science behind it. And from my perspective as a psychologist, and anybody who has been to a Media First event with me will know that I emphasize the emotional aspect of it. But how important is the emotional aspect in terms of what our brain is doing connected to the messages that we're getting?
Okay, let's get a bit of context here. You're wanting to talk about memorable messaging. Now, memorable messaging can be about teaching, it can be about learning, it can be about influencing, it can be about persuasion, and it has to be about decision making. Often when people are trying to get a message across, they want somebody to make a decision in favor of their point of view or what they're selling or what service they're offering. Okay. The work of Antonio Damasio is absolutely key here, because his work, he basically is a very famous neuroscientist who has worked with patients with closed head injuries for many, many years. He's now retired. His son has taken over his research. But one of the things Antonio did was he came up with a task called the gambling task, whereby he gave participants 4 decks of cards, 2 red, 2 black, but two packs were of high risk, 2 packs were low risk. All they were told was this: at the turn of a card, you will win money or you will lose money. That was it. But of course, being a psychology experiment, it was rigged. So that's what we do. We rig everything. Otherwise we can't measure it. So basically, I know we're very naughty. So basically, not as naughty as we were in the 1960s when ethics weren't existing. Now that was
quite, yeah.
I loved it. Well, I wasn't around then, unfortunately, but hey, I would have loved it to a certain extent. I digress. So basically, these people are given these 4 decks of cards. You've got to save money, you've got to make money. Only instruction. So they start turning over the cards. And they're turning over the cards. And they keep turning. After the turn of 50 cards, they dawns on them that something is happening, but they're not sure which. So unconsciously, they are starting to go towards the decks of cards that are going to make them money as opposed to lose money. By the turn of 80 cards, then it dawned on them what on earth the experiment was about. However, at the turn of 10 cards, okay, now meanwhile, by the way, their hands were wired up to skin conductance response machines, which means they were measuring sweat, measuring anxiety, measuring fear, measuring those sorts of emotional responses. What they found was at the just turning over 10 cards, as the hand got close to the decks where they could lose money, it began to sweat more. So basically, they were demonstrating that emotional response and emotional decision-making was way below conscious awareness. way below, which means that emotion is absolutely central to any kind of message we are trying to get across.
Yeah, I see this in the way people use the internet and the messages they look at online. We know that consciousness probably doesn't kick in until about 700 milliseconds. Yeah. And yet we can see when they're making the decision as to whether or not they're engaging with that message online is happening at something like 560 milliseconds. Yes. So we can see the parts of the brain that are involved in the decision making about that message is happening before anybody's consciously aware of what they're reading online. And so,
yeah. And of course, emotional response is fast, because we need that to get us out of trouble.
That's
so
right.
Really fast. So we need to plug into emotion all the time with all of our messages.
One of the key things that is often comes up in many aspects of messaging is how much of it is linked to those basic survival instincts that we have. Everything comes back to those what you might call lower order operations in our brain about survival. So there are lots of things related to that. So emotion obviously is key to that. What other aspects, though, when we see a message and the emotion has triggered in to be really important to us, what other aspects about messages become important at that stage to us, do you think, when we see the message for the first time?
When we see a message for the first time, it's really important that we inspire curiosity if somebody's going to continue to be engaged with that message. So it's incredibly important that we embrace curiosity hugely. Now, how we do that when we have got a message of, say, 2 or 3 words is very difficult, but of course it can be done, and it needs to be done, because what happens is when we satisfy our curiosity, we get a massive surge of dopamine. So it's satisfying. Dopamine is a part of the reward circuitry. So it's all about motivation. It's all about anticipation of reward. And so we need to get that dopamine fix. And why? Because we will then like it, feel happy about it, and we will want to be engaged more on that particular topic. So we need curiosity stimulates the dopamine secretions, which is fantastic. But what happens with dopamines, it also enhances learning and also strengthens memories. So therefore, we are more likely, if we have stimulated curiosity, to A, to grab their attention, and B, to make the people remember what our message was.
Yeah, but that curiosity comes back to the point I'm making about survival instincts. We're curious about those things that are happening all around us in order to survive, because the part of the brain's responsibility is to keep you alive and to keep the human population alive. And if we're not curious about things that could be harmful to us or beneficial to us, then clearly there's a danger that we're going to peg it. And so the brain is constantly trying to monitor things to make sure that you're alive. So what are the things that trigger those survival instincts? What kind of things are going to be in messages that make the brain go, that can help me survive?
Well, typically the work of Joseph Ledoux is all about the amygdala, and the amygdala is a prime player in this scenario. So, for instance, Ledoux gives an example of you're walking around a park at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's some city that is normally totally safe, and you see something curled up on the ground. You jump back, because what's happened is that information, that raw data, has gone back into your occipital lobe at the back of the brain. And then visually you haven't analyzed it. It's too quick, because you've got to jump back before you've analyzed it in the brain. So the message goes to the amygdala. The amygdala has two pathways sending the same message and the same data to different parts of the brain. The first is incredibly fast, which is the one that makes you jump out of the way. The second one is a bit slower, but when I say slower, I'm talking about the brain here, so it's still very quick. So the second one is a slower pathway, which goes meandering about a bit in the brain and says, okay, hang on a minute. That's not a snake. It's a curled up stick. Hello, we're 2 o'clock in the middle of London in a park. Of course it's a stick. So then the brain decides then that that can be ignored. And that is a key with messaging. Because we now know from the work of Breiter and other players like him that the brain, the amygdala especially, habituates rapidly. So if we are presented with a perceived threat and the brain then works out that it's not a threat, we then ignore it. So some work I did with a large insurance provider here in the UK, they were looking at whether positive emotion or negative emotion in their marketing was having any difference. In actual fact, normally their marketing was so boring. It was hard charts and the things like that was so boring. Now I know it's relevant. Luckily, my husband reads this stuff, but to me, it's like, oh, really? So it's important information. However, what we discovered that when we use the written word via an email, so it's in letter form, using positive emotional words like saving for your family, helping your grandchildren with buying their first car, whatever, buying a holiday, as opposed to negative emotional words like struggling and survival. The interesting thing was on this particular experiment using EEG that the brain was very much more activated when we used positive emotional words, much more, but more importantly, galvanized into action. Actually galvanized into action, because the negative words, and we have used fear, uncertainty, and doubt forever, ever since we've had advertising and marketing and sales. But the trouble is, unless you are persuading someone or trying to persuade somebody that your product is the best on the market, unless they need it right now, unless they will not actually embrace it, it would just be that awful word, interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's the bane of my life. Oh, that's really interesting, but I won't do anything. Right? You've got to, if you're messaging people, you've got to persuade them to do something. So therefore, in the business context, we found that positive emotional words worked better to actually get people to do something. And of course, that was stimulated first off by curiosity.
Yeah, this annoys me on the internet, actually. I don't know if you use the internet very much, Linda, but there are things on the internet, and I'm going to surprise you now, but there are things on the internet that aren't true, and it's amazing, isn't it? And what annoys me is all these kind of quasi experts telling you, if you do this negative headline and this use negative words, you get more people clicking on your message. Whilst that might be true, it's the action they take that's really important, and they don't take any action because it's referring to that point you made about the curled up stick or the snake. It's that instant kind of, oh my goodness, this is a problem. And then they realize it isn't because they don't have that problem. Yeah. And so they disappear. Whereas the positive messages on the internet get more engagement and more activity. And so for years, there has been this, what are people's fears? That's what you need to sell. That's the message you need to sell. But the science of this tells us that isn't true. That's the science is that the positive messages and the positive emotions that you trigger are the ones that are really important. And I think that what that refers to is how relevant is it to me now? One of the acronyms that Media Firsts use that many people here on this webinar might remember or know is truth. Is it topical? Is it relevant? Is it unusual? Does it have any element of trouble? And is it human interest? And that instant reaction to the curled up stick, as it were, is it relevant to me? And also it's unusual because I wouldn't see a snake in a park in London kind of thing. So messages that stick out, that are unusual, that are relevant to you as an individual, trigger that emotion. And if it's positive, then you're more likely to take some action, aren't you?
I think so, yeah. And there's another one that I always like to talk about, and that's by Wu and Huberman. They've done a lot of work, a huge amount of work on novelty. That if you've got a short message that you're trying to get across, it's the novelty that actually will grab their attention as well. So in fact, their research shows that it's novelty trumps everything when it comes to attention grabbing. Yep. So it is the attention grabber. So, there's an awful lot of noise out there. There's an awful lot of stuff going on out there. The competition is huge. Everybody's trying to give away information. We're saturated with information. So we need to actually really think. I hate the term, but outside the box, because you've got to be really novel. And in fact, a lovely example I saw was I was in the States a couple of years back, and there was these big billboards, and there were two cows outside, plastic big, huge cows outside of the billboard. One was on all fours, one was standing on its back, on its hind legs, painting, pretending to paint on the billboard, and it said, "Eat more chicken." Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
I just love that. Eat more chicken. 2 cows writing that. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Novelty. It worked because I've remembered that forever, as clearly I have. So yes, novelty and curiosity and emotion are definitely strong keys to memorable messaging.
Yeah, that links to some people on the call here might have read Seth Godin's book. Seth Godin's a marketing writer, and he wrote a book about purple cows. And it transpires that he got the idea for the book when he was on holiday in France, where, of course, you go past lots and lots of black and white cows, and he hadn't really noticed them because they weren't unusual.
Yeah.
And so if there'd been a purple cow amongst thousands of black and white cows, he would have noticed it because it was novel. It was different. And we're primed to spot novelty. I do this in, I may have done this with some people on the call actually, but I get that I'm sitting in their office and we're in a meeting, we're in a training course, and I ask them then to get up and look for things, to walk around the room and look for things, to see things that they've never spotted before. And every time people notice things in the room they've never spotted before, like a plug socket on the wall or something and they've been into that room hundreds of times. Yeah. And the reason they don't notice it is because has no novelty. It's not unusual. And then a little bit later, I will literally throw 2 or 3 paper balls whilst they're doing something. And of course, everybody notices this paper, ball of paper fly through the air, because you don't normally get balls of paper fly through the air whilst you're doing an exercise in a training course. Yeah. It's the novelty of that.
It is absolutely key. On this same trip, when I saw the 2 cows, we went on the zip wire in Las Vegas. I don't know if you've been there, but you go across downtown Vegas in the sky, up in the shopping mall, really wide up, and you look like Superman. Well, I was pretending to be Superman because that's a sort of stupid thing I do. But anyway, so we were flying through the air. But whilst we were waiting to go up onto the tower to get onto the zip wire, there was a restaurant right there. What a surprise! But the restaurant was called Heart Attack Grill.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I've seen it on the TV. I've never been to Vegas myself.
Okay, well, this Heart Attack Grill, the menu in the window, it's got flatliner fries. It's got single beef burger, single bypass burger, triple bypass burger, quadruple bypass burger. But you only cash because you might be dead before the check clears. All of this stuff, the waitresses and waiters are dressed like medical staff, and the customers are given a hospital gown, disposable hospital gown to go in, because they are eating stuff that could kill them if they ate enough of it. It's all grease. And it's Heart Attack City. So rather than then go, oh no, our food is actually fine, they're instead saying, yeah, it's going to kill you. Come on in. That place was heaving. Yeah. Heaving. Brilliant.
I mean, a part of that is about trust, isn't it? Because you now trust them because they're being honest. They're telling you the truth about it. In terms of the science of messaging, if we've got people to engage with it and they've paid attention to it, how much is trust important in terms of them being able to remember that message?
It's vital. If you want repeat business, it's vital. If you are selling tourist trinkets at Waterloo Bridge, then don't even worry about it, because the tourists won't be coming back. But if you're a business where you need repeat business, then trust is absolutely vital. But we know that. We absolutely know that we've got to do that. Now, if you look at the vagus nerve, which is the biggest nerve in the body, which goes from the top of the spine right the way down, and it also filters out to the heart, to the intestines, and all the essential organs. If you look at that, it's very much associated with trust and with altruism and with kindness as well. So if you're looking at those emotions, especially trust, that is going to be bringing in the chemical oxytocin. which is known as the bonding chemical. It's what a woman secretes in abundance when she gives birth or when she's breastfeeding, because she needs to bond with her baby fast. Otherwise, in the old days, and in some countries still, that baby would perish if it didn't bond with the mother. Now, in a business context, that's extremely important to stimulate oxytocin, and we can do that by stimulating trust. And the delicious thing is, the more trustworthy we are, the more trusted we become. So the more trustworthy you are, the more you're trusted. The more trustworthy you are, the more you're trusted. So you've got this lovely, lovely feedback loop. Now, there's a big issue with oxytocin in that it has a dark side. And the dark side is this: if you have stimulated oxytocin and you've stimulated trust with your client base and your customers, that is fantastic. But if you let them down, they will demonize you because of oxytocin. That's the dark side. So if you let them down, and sometimes we do, the only thing you can do is just throw your hands in the air and say, I am so sorry. I can't believe I did that. I am really, really sorry. And apologize and do anything to make amends, to try and claw back that trust. Because without the trust, they won't come back to us.
Absolutely. And I think a really good example of that, and it's a very old example, it comes from 1989, but it's still in modern day textbooks of journalism and communications and, people doing media at universities. This is still in the textbooks, and it's from 1989, and it was the British Midland air crash where 47 people were killed on the M1. 74 people are seriously injured. And it's still used because the chief executive of the business at the time, Michael Bishop, showed that, he held his hands up and said sorry straight away. He didn't know what to say. In fact, it turns out they'd had a meeting on the Friday. This happened on 8 or 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. But on the Friday afternoon, they had left their board meeting realizing they had no media plan should they have a crisis. So next week's job was going to be, what do we do when we get a crisis? And they got this crisis before they could even start the work. So he's standing there on live TV thinking, I don't know what to say because I haven't been trained what to say yet. So he said what he felt was the right thing to say. And of course, it then meant that actually the following week, more people booked with British Midland than ever before. And yet, in the history of air crashes, the trajectory of their sales is usually the same trajectory the plane had the previous week. But people don't want to go with them anymore because they become corporate and untrustworthy. Yeah,
absolutely. And we can see that with our politicians. We can see that in business. We can see it everywhere. Trust is really, really key if you want to have somebody engage with your messages repeatedly.
Yeah. And again, that also relates to another acronym used by Media First called AMEN, where you're focusing on your audience. What is it how will your audience trust you? What do they need to know from you in order to trust you? There's lots of work done by a guy called Professor Robert Cialdini, who used to be at Stanford, who looked at how we are trusted and how we persuade people as a result of being trusted. So his work is really important in this. In terms of what he's talking about one of the key things is about authority. How do people see you? What's your status as the message giver? And if there's anything that affects your status as the message giver, and you don't have that authority because you're not trusted, unfortunately, no matter how good the other science of your message is going to be, it's not going to hit home, is it?
Absolutely, 100%. If you are showing that, this is why when people talk about neuroscience who aren't neuroscientists, I hear a lot of nonsense being said. But if you are in an audience or you're with a group of people who know that you have just said something incorrectly about a topic that isn't yours, they will then become suspicious about your word of the topic that you're an expert in. So it's very important that when we are coming from a place of authority, we make sure that, yes, we're authoritative in our own area of expertise, but also if we're venturing outside of that, we must actually really know what we're saying. And if we don't know, saying, well, look, I've just heard, I don't know if it's true, but you've got to put those caveats in place. So, or that I've heard the recent studies that is something, although studies before that have said the opposite. Something where you are being honest and open and not trying to be seen as putting the wool over somebody's eyes. So you're still coming from a place of authority in your own area of expertise.
Yeah. So if we've got all this science right in terms of thinking about how we construct our messages and appealing to people's emotion and doing it from an authoritative, trustworthy position, we have another problem though, don't we? And that problem is there's an awful lot of messages out there now. How do we cut through the noise of all the different messages? What is it that will make people sit up and pay attention?
Well, I think what a good idea. Sorry, I had to lean on the footstool here. I think what would be a really good idea is if we tried to marry some of these things together. For instance, if we know that novelty and curiosity are a big deal, and we know emotion is a big deal, then let's do that. Let's work on the novelty. Let's work on the curiosity. But then, of course, we now know with emotion especially, the brain can habituate, which means it can start to ignore once they've got over the initial messaging. So then we've got to adopt something called the illusion of truth, which is the more you hear something, the more it becomes true in your head. So if you are grabbing people's attention with curiosity, novelty, emotion, and then so you're appealing to them and you want to embrace them, it's then about repetition and the illusion of truth, which means that people will that will be definitely cemented in their mind as being the correct information and to follow up.
Yeah, that links in a way to work that I know of that was done at the University of Wisconsin, or must be 20 years ago now, where they were looking at how do messages stand out. So it's done at the School of Journalism there, and they were looking at video messages in particular, so TV, and thinking about, how do the marriage of the words and the images matter in terms of people being able to sit up and take notice of the message. And what they found was that if the pictures and the words didn't quite match, if there was, a bit of a delay between the image and the words, or they were not quite congruent, didn't quite match, their brains started to process these things in such a way that it meant they didn't hear any of the message. So they got completely lost. So the visual and the sound have to match identically. And when that happens, it means that actually they can concentrate on getting the message and notice those messages out of all the noise that's there. Because obviously on TV, we get lots of different things. And so we notice those things where the sound and the pictures are so tightly knitted together that we can now concentrate. And we lose attention on those things that are a bit out of sync, as it were.
Absolutely. And that's a really interesting point, Graham, because there's a place in the brain called the visual word form area. And it's been studied by Chen and colleagues since about 2019, but it's been studied before that. But their research showed that this one area integrates the processing of language, of attention, and visual abilities. So that's one area of the brain that's doing all three of those things. That's very much worth remembering. And the other thing is that touches upon that is that the basis the absolute one thing, if anyone wants to take away one thing from this webinar, that needs to be that the brain will take shortcuts. Yep. It will make assumptions. It has to. It has to, because it's trying to work out something that's relevant in a massively noisy place. It's looking for relevance to it and to its brain and what it needs. But our attention is faulty, which means we might be attending to the wrong bit, which isn't helpful. But we need to remember that the brain will go to heuristics, it will go to shortcuts, it will go to assumptions, because it is having to work very quickly and it is having to conserve energy. So your message has to be bang on. You must remember all the time that that's what the brain will do. So you need to be really crystal clear and simplify all messages if you possibly can.
And it's a bit like the psychology of reading, that when we get a written message, that we're not reading the words. We're looking at the shapes of words.
Mm.
We're looking at the overall, we look at the shape of a phrase. We're not looking at individual letters. And so we interpret that in a visual sense. But at the same time, I know there's something called the phonological loop, where the brain is going, what does this sound like? And so it's effectively processing the thing in two different ways, and there'll be a winner out of those ways. And that means that written messages can get misinterpreted, because if the visual representation is interpreted more quickly than the sound one, or we get that conflict where we don't actually understand what we are reading because the sound is different to the picture, and your brain goes, don't know what to do here, move on.
Absolutely, and it will ignore. That's what it does. It will ignore because it now perceives that not to be relevant. But that's why it's very important to really know your audience, and I know everybody knows that. But if you are talking to an academic audience or a very high level in some kind of speciality, then you can use the correct wording. You're going to use the correct vocabulary that relates to them. So you're going to speak in the esoteric. You're going to be speaking into the language that they understand. But for the general population, to try to use language like that sounds arrogant and cocky and downright irrelevant. So we need to simplify without dumbing down. Always simplify. I try to do that with all of my work. Simplify without dumbing down is really important for that very reason.
Yeah, the choice of words and the language you use has again got to relate to the audience that you're targeting, and be really specifically aimed at them. But it does mean that actually, in terms of the science of messaging, the choice of words does become really important. It's not just writing a message and it works for you in the office kind of thing. Actually, the precision of those words is really important. And I like to think about this in terms of the Sun newspaper. The Sun newspaper employs 2 people, and their only job is to write the splash headline on the front page. They spend all day doing that. And the reason they do that is because there's a significant difference, uplift in sales of a national newspaper, depending on what's on the front page, because a lot of people are promiscuous readers. They'll buy one newspaper one day and another one the next, depending upon what the headline is. So getting that headline right, is that front page headline determines the income of the newspaper. And so they're prepared to pay 2 senior journalists a huge amount of money compared with some of the others, just to write sometimes one word. And they've spent all day on that single word. That word choice has financial implications. It's really important that we choose our words very, very carefully in our messages.
I think that's right. And a very good a friend of mine, he's a branding expert, marketing expert. He always used what he calls the 3 C's: context, concept, and content. And he basically, and this is one thing that our politicians don't do very well, is we've got to start with the context of what's going on here. So the context is we are talking about the science of memorable messaging. And then you've got to be talking about the concept, which is we're giving you some scientific information to support the things that you probably know, but you haven't really thought about in the same way before. And then the last, of course, is the content, where we go deeper into it. So those three C's are vital. And as you've said, those 2 journalists for the Sun newspaper, they would have employed the 3 C's for one word.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That is so clever. No wonder they earn a lot of money.
Yep. Now, Linda, you and I could go on chatting about this for hours and hours. Unfortunately, we don't have hours and hours, but I'm going to go all Chris Whitty now, because we do have a few slides to go through. So I need to now say, can I have my first slide, please? I knew I had to say it one day. So this is the error that KFC made a while back, where they ran out of chicken, basically. What is it about this messaging that they did that you think is really important here?
Okay, well, I'm just writing a note here about that particular slide. Well, first of all, what we've talked about is that novelty, curiosity, and emotion. And of course, it cuts through the noise. So what has this slide got? And also, let's bring in the 3 C's, the context, concept, and content. So has that ticked the boxes? So let's have a look. Novelty, yes. Curiosity, yeah. Why? We all know what you know, in speed writing, the FCK, what it means without a vowel. So the curiosity, but how does that mean anything in terms of their message? So then now people are wanting to be engaged with it. Emotionally, yeah, definitely. Some people would be really rather put out with that, think it's just absolutely dreadful. Other people think it was funny. So you start to engage people emotionally. And in terms of the 3 C's, context, concept, and content, it's ticked those boxes as well, hasn't it?
It has. And it also, that because it says we're sorry, it relates to that trustworthiness bit.
Yep.
That you can trust them because they're apologizing. They're not saying it was somebody else's fault. And you know, running out of chicken may well not have been entirely their fault, but they're taking the hit for it. And actually, you know, this has been, you know, this was widely praised on social media. So many people were saying how grateful they were to KFC for being honest with them.
I think that's right. And also, of course, what it does demonstrate when we're prepared to apologize, it demonstrates we're fallible.
Yeah.
And like every other human being on the planet. So all of a sudden they become one of us because we make mistakes too.
Now, we've got a few more slides to go through, obviously. So let's see the next one. This was a quote that was heard on Radio 4. And this was a project being done at the University of Portsmouth where they were looking at breeding oysters. And this quote, "We are hanging oysters in cages like love hotels." How does that work as a message?
Well, I think it's a bit too clever, personally. It's not necessarily speaking to a particular population that are relevant to what they're saying. Although, yeah, emotionally it's engaging. We're talking about love hotels. They've definitely, you know, oysters are supposed to stimulate romance. So I can see where that comes in. I find it's the 3 C's are not quite ticked very well, are they? No, it's definitely not 3 C's. Curiosity, a bit, although can I be bothered?
Yeah,
grabbing.
I think it's an interesting, unusual way of approaching this, so that it makes you stand up and go, "That's interesting," bit of curiosity. But you know, I'm probably showing my age, but I've no idea what a love hotel is. Maybe I was never invited to one. I don't know. But
everybody, did you hear that? I think that was a request.
Yeah, my wife's in the other room. Okay, so this was from Tesco, asking you effectively not to buy beer from them, but to go to your pub. That's an interesting message, isn't it?
Well, I think that's really clever because, first of all, they are bringing in their strap line, every little helps at the bottom there. That's really clever. They are bringing in the idea of an emotionally, a cold beer that looks lovely, that's inviting. So it's a positive emotion. They're also stimulating collaboration, community. Let's help our publicans, you know, go and drink beer at the pub. Let's start to come together. So it's very much enveloping the emotional context. 3 C's, and it's novel. And it does stimulate curiosity. And it also stimulates trust because they are helping others. I think that's a good one. What do you reckon?
I think what's important to notice here is the positive words in here. So things that you're going to associate with the word Tesco is fantastic deals. They're not, you know, support them. These are all positive messages that they're putting in there.
Yeah.
And so I think that even though, and they're asking you to do something positive, pop to your local, something that people would want to do. So again, this is positive messaging that's going to help Tesco, even though it looks like they're asking you not to buy their beer, but to buy somebody else's. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
I just caught a flash on the side of my screen then, which is why I was mildly distracted. But thank you, Cameron, for pointing out what a love hotel is to me. Thank you. It might relate to the fact that I've only been to Japan once. Okay, JFK's inaugural speech here. Ask not what your country can do for you, but rather what you can do for your country.
Context. Excellent. I think very good on content. Very good on concept and context. All three C's are working there. It's camaraderie. It's coming together. It's patriotism. It's a positive. It's encouraging positive emotion again, because we can do something by coming together as a team, large team, and I think it shows JF Kennedy as a man of integrity and of hope, and authority.
I think also, in terms of the specifics of the words, there are 4 words here that speak directly to an individual. So your country, do for you what you can do for your country.
Yeah.
And so it's speaking directly to the individual. And we often see in a lot of messaging that, a lot of business messaging, I get that, I've sat in offices with people and said, your messaging is all about you, the business. One of the things I show people on the internet, how much of Amazon is about Amazon, how much of Google is about Google, how much of Facebook or eBay is about those businesses. Nothing on their website, hardly anything on their website is about them as businesses. It's all about us and what we do. And then you go to business websites and, you've got, we began our business in 1842 and we've been through this and we've done that and we. And, the internet is weed all over, and that's why it doesn't work. So this is all about you as the individual. So when messaging, and that really connects with that relevance and about that need to pay attention. What does this mean to me as an individual? That's survival instinct stuff kicking in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. BMW then.
I like that.
Yeah.
Some fear change, others drive it. That really does peel, doesn't it? Again, you have got the 3 C's you've ticked in the box straight away. You've got positive emotion. You're saying, okay, are you going to drive your destiny? Are you going to be in charge of your destiny? You can with this car, and if you don't, you're one of those that is going to fear change. So they're using a negative word, but coming back with a positive message as well. So it's using the fear, uncertainty, doubt principle plus positive emotional response as well. So I actually think that's rather clever. What do you think?
I think so too. And also, if you like BMW, or you're interested in a car that has doors open, the different way to the way we've always had car doors open before, the people who fear change are not you. That's somebody else. And so this is to you because you are attracted by the image and you're going to drive it. You're part of the others. And so that's a positive emotion. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, another radio one now. And I know we're almost out of time, so I think this will be our last one. Say it, mean it, put it down in legislation. So this was the president of the National Farmers Union trying to get politicians to get on with stuff.
But isn't it interesting, their words? Put it down. What do we do with animals when they're sick? We put them down. That actually doesn't, I don't find that at all appealing. It doesn't, that I feel very negative when I look at that. And I don't understand I don't really get what they're trying to get, what they're talking about.
I think one of the key things here is about choice of words.
Yeah.
If put had been changed to right, it may have had a much bigger immediate impact, I think. So this is about choice of words, and I think it's concise. It says 3 things that they want to happen, but I think, again, I would edit that and make it right.
Absolutely. I think so too.
Okay, I think we are right out of time in terms of our discussion. We've got a few minutes left where James is going to take us through some of the questions that have been asked. But Linda, thank you very much indeed for being part of this and for giving us your insights. It's been fascinating for me, and I hope that everybody else has found it fascinating as well.
Thank you very much, Graham. You're really good at asking questions and having a lovely conversation. You've made it easy for me. Thank you.
Thank you. James, I think
Thanks,
you've got some
guys.
questions.
That was amazing. Yeah, that was completely fascinating. There's loads of questions coming in, so let's see if we can try and get through some of these. And if we don't have time, then maybe we'll revisit them. First off, Spencer, thanks for pointing out, mate, that I should have told everybody not to waste loads of their time writing down notes, because we will be doing a blog at the end of this, which will cover off all the key points. We'll go over the acronyms or link to all the acronyms. In fact, there's loads of blogs on our website that you can go and check out, which is mediafirst.co.uk, where you will find all of those acronyms covered, loads and loads of case studies and examples. But Spencer and the other 58 people who upvoted that, good shout. I'll make sure I say that in future introductions on my webinars. Sophie Basil, I'm going to just go through these in kind of vote order, guys. So Sophie Basil, do you think that this applies to third sector organizations? Do you sometimes need that negative emotional reaction to encourage donations, for example? So this is obviously when you were talking about talking positively in a message as opposed to using negatives to try and hook people in. So do you think it applies to third sector organizations, and do you sometimes need that negative emotional reaction to encourage donations, for example? Linda, what do you think?
I think that the fear, uncertainty and doubt principle has been very effective for many, many years. And I think that if used well, it will definitely galvanize people for support a charity if they feel very sad, very sorry, and they can do something. So you're appealing to their ability to do something. But that said, all the research shows that when we just concentrate on the negative, we will lose a lot of people along the way. We do need to turn this around into more positive type of messaging. And I would prefer to see something like, if it was a charity saying that this is, that these children are going to starve to death unless we help them. Can you please help us? Asking somebody for their help is amazing. Absolutely amazing effect, because if people feel that they can do something to help, they will feel better about themselves. That's why social psychologists will tell you there's no such thing as altruism, because we actually feel better because we're helping others, even though we're not expecting anything in return. But my answer to that is I don't care. I think we should act like not decent human beings and help one another. So yeah, in terms of that, it will work. But I think you need to marry it up with somebody actually feeling better about themselves for following through. What do you reckon, Graham?
I'm going to answer the question in a couple of years' time. The reason for that is that what we didn't say at the beginning is that I'm an academic when I'm not doing things like this, and so I've got a master's student who's just literally started. So I'm supervising their dissertation. That Richard just started looking at this very question. About the messaging for things like charity sectors and so on. And then hopefully her study over the next couple of years will provide an answer to you, and I'll let you know, James.
So Sophie, hang tight for a couple of years. I promise you we don't normally take that long to respond to questions, but yeah.
Normally I give an answer straight away. But
yeah. Chelsea Carrington, thanks for the question. 25 other people voted this up. Which companies and brands are doing this well? I can think of a few, but just interested in who you think is really at the cutting edge of this. So in essence, are there any brands out there that you think are really kind of creating compelling messages that are cutting through?
You've got me on the spot there. Graham, can you think of any?
I think
you can come back to us if you need to.
I think some do, but not consistently. So you see people like, Tesco do that great advert at this point, and KFC, and then for another year you don't remember them or think about them. So something triggers them to do something really good, and then they fall back into their kind of ordinary ways. And one of the studies that I have looked at is where you look at why do people in marketing do what they do. They provide lots of evidence to their bosses to show that, I do this and it has this impact. But actually, when you dig deeper into the data, what you discover is that many marketing messages are done because actually that's easier to do. And so it's easier. So, for example, at the moment, email marketing works very, very well indeed. But actually, compared with some of the things that aren't working, it's really quite relatively straightforward to do. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so there's a problem with that, in that a lot of messaging, a lot of companies are, doing the self-fulfilling prophecy route of messaging, and then something happens that makes them change that, such as having to respond in a pandemic. And they do really, really well because they've been more creative, more thoughtful, thought more about the science and got it right. And then they go back into their, lap of security.
Yeah, great.
I've got a question here from Virginia Hodge. She's addressed it to Graham, but obviously open to the pair of you, Graham. So why does fake news take off if it's using negative headlines, please? Maybe you could apply the truth acronym to that, Graham.
Well, it depends what you mean by take off. So what action is taken on that fake news? So there is plenty of fake news about the vaccines, for example, at the moment, and yet 80% of people clearly haven't believed it because they've got vaccinated. And so it hasn't really taken off. It's only taken off in about 4 or 5% of people. Why it takes off, the reasons for fake news comes back to relevance. It comes back to how relevant it is to you as an individual. Some people will already have a belief in something, and this confirms their belief. So there's a whole notions of things like confirmation bias that is coming into play here. So there's lots of reasons why some people will believe in fake news, but the majority of us don't. We know it's fake because it comes back to that authenticity, that authority, all of those kind of aspects. We know what's not right. And Linda, you spoke about the vagus nerve and how big that is and how widely distributed it is. But I think it's also important to realize that lots of our neurotransmitter receptors are not in our brain. They're elsewhere in our body. And you mentioned about the connection. So we do get a gut instinct that something is fake. And our gut instinct is because of all of that distribution of neural activity outside the brain. We do feel it in our gut.
Absolutely. As a caveat there, that if we are going to listen to our gut, it's pretty good when it comes to making a decision or thinking about something that we are already know about, we've already got a history in. If it's something that's brand new to us, then be careful. Just be careful. But nevertheless, we also you talked about your beliefs so far. It's all about our perceptions, because our perception is unique to only us. It's our personal reality and not anybody else's. So if the fake news plugs into our personal reality, it will, in inverted commas, take off.
Guys, we literally got a couple of minutes. There's a question here that I really want you guys to answer. So I'm going to ask the question, but before you answer it, I'm just going to go over a couple of the acronyms, because I've noticed a lot of people have been asking about those acronyms. So the question I want you to answer in a moment, please, if you wouldn't mind. And Siobhan, I hope I've got your name right. Apologies if I haven't. Do you have any insight or tips to share on how to re-establish trust with supporters if that trust has been broken somehow, like through reputational damage? How can an organization or company come back after that? And there's 16 or so other people who have upvoted that. Before you guys answer that, though, there were a number of people who asked just for clarification on some of the acronyms that got mentioned during the webinar. These are media first acronyms that we use in our message development and our media training. So one of the acronyms was truth. There were some questions as to, some people missed some of the letters. So truth is something that is topical. It's something that is relevant, so relevant to a particular individual, as Linda was just saying there. Something that is unusual. Often whenever we ask that question, people say, oh, news is something that's unique. Well, it's not unique. It's just something that's unusual. Something that the second T is trouble. Now, that can be either introducing a problem or it could be solving a problem. A cure for cancer is obviously solving a problem, as opposed to, here's a new a problem with this vaccine or a problem with this new process or strategy, whatever it might be. And the final letter, the H of truth, is human interest. So whatever the message is that you're creating, whatever it is that you're talking about when you're in a media interview, it's so important to relate that to people. What does that mean to the person on the street? And how can you back that up with a human example? How can you bring that message to life with a human example? So it's topical, relevant, unusual, trouble, and human interest. That's the truth acronym. The other acronym that people were asking a lot about was AMEN. Graham mentioned that. AMEN is a message development acronym that we use sometimes on our courses. It stands for audience, so identifying who the audience is that you want to create a message for, and that's being really niche and targeted with that message and with that piece that you're working on. Figuring out what's the message, what is it that you want to say, as an organization, as a department, as a person, and also what is it that your audience wants to hear from you? What is it that they need from you? So thinking about it from both sides of that coin. The E of AMEN stands for examples. So again, that's an opportunity for you to bring in that human example. What is it how are you going to reinforce that? It's no good just saying to people, we're the best media training company in the world. We are. But it's also about backing it up with, examples of why you're the best media company in the world. We've got 40% of the FTSE 100 who regularly rebook with us and who ask us for support with, our training. So that's the reason, it's coming up with that example that reinforces why you're the best. And then also thinking about the negatives. So, for example, we don't just train massive clients. We also train, small startups and charities. And we don't just do huge courses for companies that are, rolling in dosh. We're a very kind of realistic business that just works to help individuals as well as large corporates. So, those are our kind of, it's audience, message, example, and negative. And consider all of that when you're creating the message, and it will help you go far. There's loads more we can talk about. We're going to have to do a follow-up on this, guys. But back to that question. Let me see if I can find it again so that I can reiterate it. It was, I can't find it, but I can remember it. It was how do you reestablish trust when, there's been a crisis or when you've lost trust of your audience, in essence. Graham, Linda, do you want to jump in there first? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of our dear friends who is a very senior CEO and used to dealing with all sorts of company issues. His favorite saying is, you only have to apologize for the truth once. Meaning that if you've got something to say, just say it and get on with it. Just say it. So we know that apologies. We've already talked about reestablishing trust, and if anything goes wrong, you've just got to apologize. But also, I think we have a habit of trying to avoid people who we've let down because we're embarrassed. We feel awkward. Well, you've just got to get over yourself. And if you really do value that relationship in terms of your business or your personal life, whatever, seriously get over yourself and go out there, find out what they really need and fill it. Find out what you can do and they really, really need. Find out, but always be honest. If you can't do something moving forward, you've just most certainly got to do that. Help them and just be humble as well. So there's lots of H's there. In fact, I might actually write that down into a newsletter. That's how I'm saying. So basically be a decent human being again. Say, look, I'm so sorry. I want to help. Tell me what you need.
Yeah. The person who's devoted a lot of research on this is a guy called Professor Vince Cavello, who's based at Columbia University in New York. And basically his research shows that when you get into a problem and you need to reestablish trust, the most important thing, and in fact in his studies something like over 50% of the impact comes from this one thing, and that is how much do you demonstrate you care for the other person.
Yeah.
In other words, if you as a company has upset people in some way, if you just demonstrate you care for them, you will get a significant buyback in towards you. And that ties in with the work done by Professor Robert Cialdini, who I mentioned earlier, because one of the 6 principles of persuasion that he has is likability. And that doesn't mean that people click a like button on Facebook to say they like you. It's about how much do you demonstrate you like them. And so you've got 2 different aspects of research here telling you that actually, if you've lost trust, the way to gain it is demonstrate that you love the other side.
Yeah.
I can tell by the number of people still in the room that we've hopefully still got most people's attention. So I'm just going to squeeze in one more acronym, which fits very nicely off the back of that, Graham. Thank you for teeing me up for the CARE acronym, which is something that we use. It's a message development acronym that we use during our crisis management media training. And CARE stands for compassion. So, how do you demonstrate compassion around what has happened? How can you be that decent human being that Linda's talking about, and apologize and say, yes, we have got this wrong, and be human, add a human face to the brand, when you're doing that. The A stands for action. What is it you're doing about it? And that, how are you going to try and prevent this from happening in the future? And that's not about over-promising. That's not about saying it's never going to happen again. It's also not about making a knee-jerk reaction and going, we're going to change this. It might be just saying we are putting, our team are looking very closely at what's happened here. And, we are going to come back and make some changes on it. So it's compassion and action. The R stands for reassurance. You have to reassure people. It is that, it's that rebuilding of trust. And again, to an extent, that comes back to everything that we've been talking around here, around the trust and, being emotionally intelligent and, trying to rebuild those bridges. And the E stands for examples. You have to be empathetic. You have to kind of come up with examples about what it is that you're doing. Again, it's not good enough just to go, we're putting in place this investigation or we've changed this process. People don't really care about process changes. They just care about the examples. What does it mean for them on the street? What does that mean is going to happen next? And that's how you can kind of reinforce all of that messaging. So it's care, compassion, action, reassurance, and examples. Linda, go on, jump in.
Just want to say, James, that CARE acronym is excellent. But if you don't tell people, they're not going to know that's what you're doing. So, if you are going to take action and what you're going to tell them what you're doing, they're not mind readers. You've got to tell them.
Yeah. I think completely. One other important thing I think is worthwhile. You've got to demonstrate compassion. You haven't got to say, we feel. You've got to demonstrate that. One of the things that infuriates me with businesses or any organization, that when they get into trouble and they want to show that they're caring and they want to show that compassion, is they come out and read a statement. Well, if you had real compassion, you would not read a statement. So the fact that you're reading demonstrates to the audience you don't care.
Or that the whole machine is got by the scruff of the neck by the PR machine, and so therefore the information is not coming across authentically. Goes back to trust again.
Or more likely the legal team, Linda. But that is a debate for another day, guys. Listen, it has been absolutely fascinating listening to you guys chewing the fat and talking about all of this. There's been some amazing comments here, from our audience. Thank you guys for all the questions. We will try and answer those, perhaps with another video, perhaps with a follow-up blog, but keep an eye out for those. But for now, Graham, Linda, thank you ever so much. And to everybody that joined us, thanks again. If you've got any other ideas for future webinars, please let us know. But take care and stay safe. Cheers, guys.
Bye.